You are listening to Modern Retrospect, retro hits and modern bits. I'm Yovan.
And I'm Joseph. This time we'll be talking about a cult classic that we plucked out of the darkness to take a stab at it. We'll be diving into its origins, its history, its reception, and our overall thoughts and experiences at playing the game.
If you like what you have been listening to so far, subscribe, rate us, or leave a message if you are feeling extra generous.
Let's dive right in. So first off, this game is actually based on a comic book series known as The Darkness that was published by Top Cow Productions, an imprint of Image Comics, with the concept created by Mark Silvestri, Gareth Ennis, and David Wohl in 1996, with its star Jacky Estacado, who actually appeared first in a series known as Witchblade by similar people who created it in issue 10. So the series stars Jacky Estacado, who is a former orphan, taken in by Frankie Franchetti, and becomes a hitman for the Franchetti family mob. That's a tongue twister there every now and then. Jacky is known as a rigid but suave anti-hero who keeps a set of codes despite being kind of brutal in his work. So when he comes into possession of his powers on his 21st birthday that are simply known as the Darkness, a cosmic entity that is meant to be the embodiment of the vast emptiness of the universe that supposedly existed before any written history and had to contend with the unfortunate formation of the universe, God's light, and his creation. So over time, it starts to take hosts throughout the centuries and eventually passes on through the bloodline through conception of whatever hosts he's taken. So it's quite a building block for what they wanted to use for a game, and quite a lot of the more ethereal aspects of it don't really show its light that much into this game. So did you ever know anything about the comics before you actually played this game?
I didn't know anything about the comics, not the Darkness anyways, but I did know Image Comics very well since I was into comics in the 90s. The comic store that I always went to get my X-Men and Spider-Man and so on and so forth, Image Comics were always next to Marvel. So I remember watching, like Witchblade, which was very kind of, intoxicating for a young kid or a teenager because, they always drew them so kind of, sexy, and the art was gorgeous. It was very modern looking. And the Darkness just kind of fits that image style from that era. But this comic in particular, no, I never heard of it before playing this game.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I've actually heard a lot about, I used to hear a lot about Witchblade, and there were a couple other comics that I was shown a while ago, and I knew that much later The Darkness was based on a comic book series. I just didn't know when I actually went into it a bit more, found out that it was a lot more cosmic oriented, because the game you play doesn't really get into a lot of that. And I think it's quite interesting because that kind of concept, it's a really cool concept, is similar to what intrigues me, kind of like how Darksiders is also a game series based on a graphic novel series with a lot of that's very flamboyant, very macho but sexy art style that a lot of older comics are known for. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of games share that similarity in these types of ways. So you actually said something about this game. You said it reminded you kind of Shadow Man. I've barely heard of that. What reminds you of it though?
Yeah, so I guess in the 90s, it was kind of like a dark time where, a lot of these, like the Darkness and, Witchblade and so on and so forth, a lot of dark material was coming out of this time, at least from what I can remember. And Shadow Man, another series really that introduced by the game. I had the N64 game, and that game was based on the comics. And then after the fact, I did some more research, kind of how Turok was, an N64 game, but based on the Turok comics. And Shadow Man had a very dark theme as well, and his protagonist, was kind of figures. It was kind of cursed as well. He had these powers, but at the same time, they were kind of like dark, like not I don't want to say darkness, yeah, but dark powers. And he had to fight, his kind of humanity, but also use these dark powers to do good, right? It's kind of like a classic tale, almost. And while not exactly the same style, I did get a lot of Shadow Man vibes from the darkness, especially early on. Even before I kind of looked it up and saw that it was based on comics.
When I first actually, I guess, came across the game for the darkness, not knowing it was based off a comic series, I wasn't into comics much when I was young. The game itself was a really hardcore rated M game at the time, and I was pretty young. So I wasn't allowed to play those types of games, especially like that when it looked, my dad and stepmom were kind of, as I said, very big on the whole Christian thing. So a game like this almost looked like satanic, right? So it's kind of funny. And it made me laugh because now that
What gave it away? The darkness?
I mean, when you really think of the cover of it, they literally look like demons on the side of him. I mean, some of his moves are that way. So quickly getting into the info, some of the game info, is that, so the Darkness it's actually a first-person shooter game that was developed by Starbreeze Studios, a studio that I actually never really heard of, and I'm starting to realize it's actually did a lot more than I thought. It actually was the developer of the Chronicles of Riddick game, which I remember hearing a lot about that back in the day.
Great Xbox and PC game.
Yeah, I remember a lot of people were talking about how amazing that game was back then, even though we never really got to play it. It was up there in class. So it was the same company, and they published this game, or it was published by 2K Games, who bought the rights from Majesco around 2006 when it was struggling financially. And Starbreeze Studios actually said they used an internally developed next-gen engine, which, if you think about it, at the time, it was still relatively early for next gen. We're talking the game came out. Yeah, game came out 2007 in June for the PS3 and Xbox 360, and that's one thing actually you and I kind of were talking about when we played the game, is you can tell the game looks good. Like for an early game, it looks really nice, but you can tell like there's some of those older aspects, like some of the hands. Some of the way the geometry is on other characters.
So the game looked really good, surprisingly good. Let me say that, surprisingly good for the year. You look at 2007, you're like, holy crap, what am I gonna see? And it actually looked pretty good, but at the same time, very dated as well. You could very much tell, that it was a game of this era, and in some ways could have been done on, the Xbox or GameCube, and I'm not sure if it would have probably lost a lot as far as game design decisions, but it would have been less prettier. But the overall kind of gameplay and stuff like that, I don't think it was doing something particularly grandiose that those systems couldn't have handled as far as scope. So, but regardless, it looks really, really nice still in a lot of areas.
Yeah, and I can actually now finally realizing that it was made by the developer of the Chronicles of Riddick, I can definitely see the similarities between the graphical style and that kind of
the dark, shadows.
Yeah, the shadows and that dark.
The shadows. That game had pretty cool shadows, character shadows, and this game. I mean, yeah, it's called The Darkness, obviously, but most, not necessarily environmental shadows, but character shadows, right?
And that special type of bloom, that early type of bloom. Too.
Oh yeah, that bloom that was all over the place in that during that era.
It's interesting because I had to look a little deeper into the game for this, and actually it's got quite a few differences from the actual comic, but it has quite a few similarities as well. So obviously you're still playing Jacky Estacado, and he's still an orphan. He still has that backstory, and he still gets his powers, of course, on his 21st birthday while he's spending his time in the mob of Franchetti. Such an interesting name. I love how everything's so Italian in the game. It actually kind of sticks out. So, and he also has a childhood friend who was also a love interest in the comics, who's actually the girlfriend in the game, Jenny Ramiro. So it's kind of interesting. So the differences are that he doesn't have like a lot of that more 90s. You know how the 90s art was when you had all those kind of heroes wearing kind of armor or special like outfits. You know, that's not really like a thing in this game. I guess they wanted to make it more grounded, so that's actually like a big difference in here. It's a lot more inspired, I guess you could say, by that older 90s Italian mafia movie feel. That is,
Yeah.
it's a little more crisp, clean looking in the comics. And the character who took him in is basically a different person. It's Paulie Franchetti instead of Frankie, who
Mm-hmm.
Paulie was the cousin, but they basically just kind of merged the characters together, and they faked being his uncle, and they had very different reasons for taking him in. So, and also the orphanage, which actually is this really supposedly sweet place he grew up in, where he spent time with his childhood friend Jenny. In the comics, he still met her in the orphanage, but it was actually an abusive place. So I thought that was interesting that they changed that, because I suppose they wanted a bit more of a hook to make him have more of a soft spot for that, because it makes sense of what they do later on in the story.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he's more of a suave, well dressed mafioso in the comics, while he's a lot more like the mob hitman, Italian hitman based on like the '90s in the video game. Even the way he talks and how his hair doesn't look very stylized. It's very just straight, very straight, long black hair down with the long black
Yeah.
coat. So
He's not quite out of Goodfellas or anything like that, because that's not how they dress there. Maybe more Sopranos, but even then, he wears like a black trench coat, slick kind of long hair. He's more of a modern kind of Italian looking guy in the game, right?
yeah, I feel like he's
And
not.
I'm not an expert on modern Italian looking guys or anything, but he's not what I think of, at least when I think of a Italian mafia. Like and what comes to mind is classic movies like Goodfellas and Casino, etc. Right? He's more new school.
There's a funny comparison. I don't remember the guy's name, but the guy who directed The Room. Have you ever heard about that B movie? It's an interesting story about The Room. His acting was really terrible. I forget his name. Tommy Wiseau. There we go. Tommy Wiseau. I swear to God, it sometimes reminds me a bit of him. If you ever look that up, it's a funny comparison on a funny story. But anyways, but yeah, it's very different because the comics are very stylized to make him look really, really slick. He's actually a lot less slick in here. He's a lot more, I guess you say down to earth. Like, he kind of seems quieter. I think the idea in the games, they wanted him kind of quieter, like a guy who has a lot that he struggles with, like dark, deep down, but he kind of keeps it kind of down there. And there's like, he does bad things, but he's a good guy generally.
Yeah, I'm gonna say the art style sometimes doesn't mesh exactly like how maybe they thought it would have.
Yeah.
Because you're right, they do play a more straight, more realistic. But so you have to picture this kind of very realistic kind of Italian mafia guy with these darkness powers coming out of him. It doesn't quite work as well as maybe the character in the Image comics.
Yeah, that's true. The Image comics really gives you that feeling. And I do think it's just the different approach. Like, they try to ground it, but you have supernatural things. And I think that's why a lot of the extra supernatural stuff or cosmic related things are not really touched upon in the game. So that's actually a big difference. It is definitely more ethereal, more, of the mind kind of in this. So it's pretty interesting nonetheless. So, but what would you say when you started the game and you got to see how the character was, and then, what was your first impression when you pop this thing in and you see like the intro and you're in a car with a bunch of mafia guys?
Well, first of all, I gotta talk about the kind of the start screen. I thought the start screen caught my attention right away because it does this thing where it's kind of very tentacle based, and every time you go into an option, the tentacles kind of move in and out really quickly. It's very stylish, very kind of high production values for its time. I thought that was very nice. So that gave me a very good first impression. Then when the game starts, it catches your attention as well because it puts you right in the middle of a car chase, right? So it looks like it's Frankie and some of his associates, and they're trying to drive away from this group of characters who are after them, which I don't think at that point they tell you why. You're kind of just plucked right in the middle of an action sequence, which is a pretty good setup. and it's pretty exciting, I say. I mean, it was kind of Call of Duty-ish, where it's very staged. You don't have a whole lot of control other than some kind of basic shooting. But I thought it was effective, and it caught my attention. But unfortunately, right after that, when I got control of my character, I kind of noticed the first-person shooting controls were kind of floaty, not great. I didn't like the way he controlled, very floaty. And then right away, I think you start getting into your first shooting scenario. Right? Is there like, if I remember correctly, it's like a construction site, right? Your car crashes, it flips over, you kill the people that were chasing you. The driver in your car also dies or not, depending on, it's your choice. I ended up blowing him away just to see what happens. Well, kind of what you did with Ashley, except this wasn't a defenseless young girl, just the president's daughter. But that's a topic.
Well, don't you do that comparison of raising the form? But you know, actually, just let you know, he dies. He dies either way, though, because if you keep talking to him or you say a couple things to him, he starts talking, and then you just kind of see him go. You know, that kind of thing where you realize he just slowly. Yeah,
so it was humanitarian what I did. It was either me or.
Well, actually, I think you can actually close his eyes too when you see him pass away. You can actually.
I did close his eyes.
Yeah. So I thought, wow,
another way. Yeah. I saw blood streaming down. Trust me. But anywho, as soon as you leave this guy, you immediately get into kind of the first firefights, I guess, with enemies, and then that's kind of where it starts to crumble. That's where the theme of the game kind of starts with me, where it's a whole bunch of good with a whole bunch of mixed stuff in there, because then these enemies were kicking my ass, man. You know, and part of it was because I was trying to get used to, you know, you don't notice how far first-person controls have come along until you kind of play a game from back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was kind of struggling a little bit with the floaty controls, the really strong auto aim, right? That old school GoldenEye magnet cursor that just kind of, it wants to just go to their stomach, everything. And I'm like, no, I want precision. So, the opening was pretty exciting. It caught my attention, but I wasn't impressed with the first shooting section of the game, which is what starts you out in earnest, I think.
Yeah, so it was a similar thing with me, that right off the bat, you kind of noticed that it's very, very, different than the usual first-person games you're used to. And it has I think it caught me narratively on kind of an interesting hook. Like, I'm trying to see, like, how the voice acting is, how they're talking, how it feels, and I was getting a good vibe of it for sure. And then they have this thing where Jacky, like, narrates during certain loading scenes or cut scenes.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting because the cinematography they use for that is actually quite stylish. And I know they're totally, like, trying to mimic, like, the noir movies or, like, the mafia movies.
It's like he's under a spotlight with kind of almost like a foggy spotlight, really. Yeah. Very.
And it actually makes his character model look actually really good in the way the lighting is done in that. It's actually kind of impressive how they made it look, and they focus on, like, sometimes when he sits there, and I noticed that only when he's talking, he only talks usually when there's in the middle between, like, an important moment, or when you're traveling that you're going the right direction, then he'll talk. Like, if you're not going the right direction, you're just, running around, it just kind of has these loading screens where he's, like, sitting there thinking or messing with his guns or, doing various things.
I did notice that they have certain clips are kind of just generic. They're interesting, but they're kind of generic. So if you're kind of going back and forth throughout the world, then they'll play these clips. But then if you're headed towards, like, a story sequence or a new area, those loading screens are kind of specific to what the story, right? They kind of give you little nuggets of story and almost like thought bubbles in a comic book of sorts.
Kind of, yes. And they make it seem like he's telling the story in kind of like a past tense, like he's already experienced all this, and you can tell, like, when he's whether angry or starting to sound sad or stuff like that. So I think that the voice actor did a good job playing the main character, and the way he makes him kind of talk really, really softly. For some reason, I thought that was interesting because you don't really hear a lot of, like, soft talking characters in games, and so he talks really, like, almost, I wouldn't say whisperish, but it kind of has that very like monotonous, subdued way of talking, which for some reason I thought actually made the character pretty interesting, especially like when he softly, pretty much, I wouldn't say insult, but intimidates this one guy you can do as a side quest. It was funny, really funny what he said. I mean, I'm not gonna really say it for the podcast. It's a pretty dirty joke, but I was busting up laughing.
Well, one of the jokes that he said during those loading screens really caught me off guard because one, it was funny, but two, it's pretty out there. It's pretty. It's like an adult joke, and it kind of caught me off guard. I didn't expect it, but it adds character. I think his character's pretty fleshed out. I mean, I wouldn't say he's super exciting or and super charismatic.
He's definitely not that relatable either.
No, I mean, he's not the most charismatic guy, but I think you're right. I think his voice actor did a good job of being like an Italian guy without kind of sounding too
cliche.
I don't know if cliche is the word, or stereotype, stereotype kind of thing. He did a good job.
Yeah. There was one thing I felt that was kind of a little abrasive, is sometimes you would go from like frantic action, literally like 1 minute before, and you'd get these really quiet moment literally like a minute later, and then you have nicer music playing after that. It sometimes was a little a bit of a contrast. It was kind of nice, but it was a big contrast. So when we actually get a little farther, or a little around the beginning of the game now, the big thing that's meant to show you, I guess, the drastic difference when you get his powers. And the one thing I thought was strange is he doesn't really like acknowledge the fact completely that he just these powers like showed up during you trying to run away from the guys who were trying to kill you after you actually get all of them. It doesn't really acknowledge the fact that they're just there now. Like, they pop up, and it's not like he's like, oh my god, what happened?
Yeah, I was confused about that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if
very jarring.
Yeah, I'm wondering if they were wondering if it was meant to be like the idea that it's all him talking about it past wise. So he's just kind of saying like, oh yeah, something really changed, and that that's the first time I died,
And we'll touch upon this later on, I suppose. But when the powers first manifest and you get to use them, I was really confused how you use them, and I don't know. I was just confused, and I didn't know how to use my powers, and the character wasn't reacting the way that I thought he should act, and in a pivotal moment like that where you should be like, oh hell yeah, I got these darkness powers. Let me use them on these poor unsuspecting enemies. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just getting shot up left and right. So I'm like, you know what? Screw these darkness powers, man. I'm just going to use my 2 pistols that I have in my hands. And that was a lot more effective. In fact, I'd say the guns were far more effective through most of the game until you kind of start getting more powerful powers. Now, that's not abnormal. A lot of games do that. But I feel like this game just took way too long to give you any kind of power that becomes useful. Other than when you're using your darkness power, you could take more hits, right? That's always a passive ability during the darkness powers, because otherwise you get taken down like in a second.
Yeah, I think the other power was well, I won't get into it too much, but we're gonna get into the gameplay a little later. But I know what you mean, that it isn't. They don't tell you a lot. You actually, most of the time, I think, had to go in the menu if you wanted to get a little more details, because they kind of quickly are like, oh, click this to use that, and but they don't tell you how to really use it. So. I thought it was interesting though that they had full reflections, that when you popped the darkness out, like his eyes start glowing and you see the things sticking out of him, and the creepy demon or demonish looking arm, almost like serpents. They're like demonic looking serpents, and when you initiate them in front of someone, they literally like, oh my god, they start like creeping away in fear. And I don't think
funny. I tried that. I didn't try that, but I did notice it's those darkness kind of serpents that come out of him. They were really well animated, I thought.
Oh yeah.
They were almost like what was that 3-headed dog kind of like
Cerberus?
In mythology? Yeah, I guess so. Or maybe the
Hydra?
The dragon with the Hydra, maybe, yeah. Where the heads are kind of snapping at each other. They're reacting to each other. That's actually kind of funny.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison, because the way they move and are animated when you actually like see them do stuff, it is very Hydra-like.
Yeah, because sometimes they even like snap at each other, kind of, and they react to each other, and they react to very, very cool. I thought that was very nice.
I love this subway station. My Uncle Paulie brought me down here on vacation one time. Count the trains. Best 2 days me and him ever spent together.
So a big scene in here that a lot of people consider to be quite interesting actually is when you actually first meet Jenny. So you actually have this phone you can use to call numbers in the game, and it's a hilarious thing that they literally have actual collectible phone numbers in the game based on side quests you do or secrets you can find, and you can actually call every single one of those numbers and they'll have some actual recorded line. Some are really funny, some are meant to be dramatic, some are meant to be very dark. It's very strange, like they've put that much effort into literally making all these excessive recordings that unlock concept art and stuff, but you can call other characters in the game. So if there's like someone you need to call, they automatically put it in the game. So when he calls Jenny, you know, you hear her for the first time and you find out, oh, like he's got like a girlfriend, and you can tell she really like loves him, and he like seems like he's had a really harsh day, and you can kind of tell he's just like wants to go meet her, right? Like he's just kind of like I've had quite the afternoon. And, you know, it's his birthday, so it's like, yeah, almost got killed on my birthday, you know, time to spend time with my girlfriend. So it's kind of funny because I think it's the moment I realized that the game was trying to do more than I thought. So when you actually go to find Jenny, it was a little hard to find her at first, I have to say. When you actually, I know you're like, oh, we're gonna get into that.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
And so when you meet Jenny and everything, you can kind of tell like it's actually described, well, it's weird, because so, you know, you can tell she's, like, really sweet, and you can say different things to her, and I love how every now and then you have the option to, like, say certain, like, different things to her, and what I thought was strange is when she's all like, oh, shows the little cake, and you can sit down and, like, make a wish or something and blow out the candles, and I thought, like, you know, they're going, like, a lot of this extra effort to show, like, you know, she really cares about him, and he's kind of, and you can tell, like, he's just a guy who doesn't talk a lot about, like, what he's feeling. And there are these moments where when she sits down and she says, oh, like, you know, sit down with me, like, you know, let's watch a movie and stuff, right? Because you're at her apartment. It's supposedly, like, she moved in recently into a new apartment. And what I thought was strange is then it gives you the dialogue option to say, tell her you love her, right? Because, like, there's all these things, he you know, he's got darkness powers he's not talking about. He's basically it basically looks like his uncle that he works for is trying to kill him, you know, and I love how one of the options is actually tell her you love her. And the interesting thing is his answer is just, no, I'm all right. When you pick that option, and I was like, whoa. And for some reason, I thought that was actually really deep. Just because the idea that that's what he wants to say, but he doesn't. When she says, is everything okay? And he's like, I'm all right. And I thought, actually, I'm like, wow, that's some really good subtle storytelling, like that connection to the player.
That whole story sequence, which is kind of early on in the game, it's probably one of the most effective, or one of the top 3 most effective kind of story beats in the whole thing, because it was so sincere. Like you said, with the birthday cake and some of the kind of dialogue choices that they give you, which, you know, doesn't always coincide with what you pick, but there's a good reason for it. And then, you know, I think they sit down and actually start watching TV, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, and it was such a tender moment. Like in a game that's kind of sometimes super ridiculous and sometimes frustrating, I didn't mind just kind of having the game show these 2 characters just sit down and watch TV for a couple minutes. And I think the game does a smart thing where it lets it play for a minute or 2, and it's just nothing but them watching TV, and it really drives the point home that, hey, these 2 people care for each other, they have history, and it's very effective.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting that they give you, like, while you're sitting there, it's all in first person. I know that when you pick dialogue options, it kind of switches to third, but usually most of the viewpoint is always from first person. So this whole time when she's like sitting down, they have the actual movie To Kill a Mockingbird playing on the TV. And you can like sit down there and watch it. And it's like an old TV. And it was a CRT. Yeah, it was old like CRT. And the interesting thing is, like, you see her, you know, just leaning, like sitting next to him, kind of leaning against him a bit. And then you kind of see her lean a little more on him, kind of like very subtly, right? Like, like a couple thing. And you can like kind of say like, oh, wrap your arm around her, and and then and as you do it, like it's just very naturally pulls her in a little bit, and she leans up against him. They're kind of like huddling, and it's all still in first person. And then she just randomly, out of the blue, like kisses you. And it's just, there's no talking. It's very silent. You hear her kind of like giggle a little bit, and she kind of just, leans back on you. And you guys just start watching stuff. And she starts to, and it's weird. You literally are watching the movie for like 2 minutes, realizing these characters are doing things. And you see like, it's presented where you see obviously his whole body like leaning on the couch too. And I thought it was very immersive, because then she starts to like get tired after like 2 minutes of you basically just sitting there. And I thought like, wow, this is what they call a game taking its time to like show it. So interestingly enough, this scene back then was rated by Maximum PC as the most authentic instance of romance ever conveyed in a video game. And I have to say, I can't really not deny that, because I've never seen a game take that much time to try to make a very casual, nice feeling for these two people, where you can tell one guy's hiding things from his significant other, but he really just wants to have this nice moment, and it's like the woman he cares for, and you can tell she really, really loves him. It's just a very sweet scene. But what I found very intriguing is you can actually, if you want to, watch the entire movie, To Kill a Mockingbird, in that game. Like the whole movie. And I remember that was one of the biggest highlights in the game. But it wasn't just that. You can experiment by finding these random TVs throughout the game.
And there's somebody that's done that. There's somebody that just sat there and watched the whole movie and like a 1-inch screen. Yeah.
Yeah, there are YouTube videos, I think, that have the whole thing.
Oh god.
And the funny thing is I was wondering how they did this, because I was told that I think the PS3 version actually had a couple more things, but the Xbox version still, where you could actually watch another movie. I think it was The Man with the Golden Gun, or The Man with the Golden Arm. There was another, you could watch a couple of cartoons, and they were all in there. Like, but you can flip through the TV, but not on the scene with Jenny. That's always To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
But it's weird how they literally put in I think it's about 2 or 3 whole movies in that game you can watch on a random TV. Or there's commercials or music videos from the 90s. And then, of course, some black and white movies like To Kill a Mockingbird. So I thought, I don't understand why they went... I guess a lot of people said it was the dedication to detail. There was a lot of that they tried to do in the game to make it feel like an actual living, breathing world. And I think that's what's so absorbing for me about it, of why I actually really started getting into it. But yes, in some cases, it sometimes does clash with the more darkness side of it, which its realism is more of like the eerie, mental, dark influence that this thing starts to have over him, and that he constantly has to contend with, because it's constantly talking to you over and over and over throughout the game, and in a very, very intimidating, menacing fashion.
Yeah, now that hearing you talk about it, it kind of reminds me of the symbiote from Venom.
Yeah.
So, especially in the latest movie, spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen it, I guess, light spoilers, but, the symbiote kind of talks to Eddie Brock the whole time. And actually, and the voice is almost exactly the same, or very similar at least. I mean, the dynamic is a little bit different, of course.
Oh, quite different, actually.
Yeah, well, I guess. And yeah, it is. In some ways it is. In some ways it isn't. Because it's this other thing that's there to help you, but it's also hurting you in a lot of ways. So it's kind of weird. But yeah, that's what I think of when I think of the darkness in this game.
Yeah, I thought they did a good job, though, at making this entity feel very otherworldly. The guy who voices him, he does this thing where he messes with his voice going up and down, where he can get really deep and growly, but then he'll go really screechy. Yeah, where he'll go like, Jacky, and then he'll go like this.
The darkness.
I actually was very impressed by it. Sometimes the really screechy one, I actually always preferred it when he talked deeper than the screechy one, because the screechy one just sounded really creepy. It was just kind of like, ugh, like I wouldn't want that in my ear. So It's really strange. Like, you have all these very soft, interesting things that happen in the game, which on a storytelling level, I was told that way back when it was reviewed actually really well, and that some of the things they talked about was that it actually did some very interesting storytelling. Now, the story by far is not like, if you put it on paper, you write the story, it's not the biggest story ever. And if you read a summary of it, it sounds interesting enough, but it's more like what they do in certain scenes in the game that kind of caught me more than the story itself. Because it's a lot of going from one place to the next and doing certain things, and the story kind of, moving along the beat. So
Yeah.
I know I'm kind of going like point by point on the story. I just feel like it's actually quite a lot to touch upon that happens in this game, because there is a lot actually to talk about for this game, story-wise and gameplay-wise. But moving on, the memories at the orphanage scene, where you're kind of walking around in that area, and you kind of see like his memories of when he was a kid with Jenny. And I know they do that to push you into the aspect of just like what she means to him, and all the kind of things that happened to him when he was young, or who he was when he was young. And I can see why they were doing it, because you only know Jenny for not that much of the game. Like, it's not that long of the game, but they do a good job of making you care about her within a short amount of time.
I wish they would have explored that aspect more. I wish you would have had more scenes with Jenny. I thought she was one of the strongest characters by far, and the good thing is the scenes that you share with her are really good, but unfortunately it's cut short too.
Yeah.
You don't get that much of it.
Yeah, you don't. I mean the reason why it's cut short is, and we're about to get into that. As I said, it would have been nice to have had a bit more, or as you said, it would have been nice to have a bit more time with her. I felt they did a good job, at least, of getting you into the mind state of just what his mind was like towards her, and you trying to care about her as that way. Because, eventually she does get kidnapped after you trying to strike back at the people who are trying to kill you, including your uncle, Paulie Franchetti. And you end up going up against this guy. And you have to say, let's just say real quick, the names in this game. Like, you go up against Dutch Oven Harry.
Yeah, they just roll off the tongue.
They did, I know, right? And
they're just, yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, a lot of these guys have supposedly these, what's the term that I'm looking for? They have a lot of these, I wouldn't say code names, they're more like nicknames. Like obviously,
street names?
Yeah, street names pretty much of like them running things, and
yeah.
And so you end up like trying to, to deal a blow into what Paulie's trying to do for you, and he ends up, Dutch Evan Harry ends up ordering Paulie to like blow up the orphanage you grew up in, and it's some pretty sleazy stuff. A lot of the characters, bad characters in here, are very sleazy, very really mean. It all boils down to the fact that Paulie and his corrupt cop friend Eddie Schroet. I always thought that was such a funny name. That guy somehow was able to live out your pursuit so much throughout that game, and I couldn't believe it. But it ends with them kidnapping Jenny and bringing her to the orphanage, and the darkness, which you can tell is kind of getting deeper and deeper into messing with Jacky, like really badly, kind of feeling like it wants to take over you more bit by bit, that it actually stops him from doing anything to save, his girlfriend, as Paulie Franchetti and Eddie Schroet basically, have her killed in front of him. It's a very it's actually kind of a hard scene, slightly. It's pretty dark, because then it ends with Jacky pretty much, after seeing she's dead, he basically just kind of takes a gun to him, and the darkness kind of freaks out, and he basically just, shoots himself against the darkness's will.
Yeah, that was my favorite scene, honestly, because he wanted to stop them, but then the darkness was kind of wrapping itself around his arms, right? And not allowing him to move. So I thought that was the most effective scene in the game. And again, it had to do with Jenny, and anything with her and Frankie was great.
Yeah, I think it was actually the idea that it knew that Jenny was like that one good thing. And technically, the crazy thing is, obviously so did the bad guys. But it's like it knew that was that one good thing that it felt was keeping him back. Like, oh, we don't need her. If we get rid of him, like, he's basically ours. Like, he's got nothing left. We'll become his world, right? And I thought that was pretty scary, like a creepy idea. And you can see, like, as I said, it was so bad for him that he literally was just like, screw this. He's all messed up with these powers, and, he loses the one person he cares about, and he ends up, just being like, forget this. So that when it gets into the really weird, very strange supernatural stuff, and that is the other world.
Chinatown. You're not here anymore. I'm trying to remember you, but all I get is this stupid shit. Like your wallpaper, smell in your hallway. Even my mind is fighting me.
So what did you think when you first wound up in the other world? A very hellish, demented-looking world that looks like World War One.
I did not expect it, because again, I wasn't familiar with the source material.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that I liked it. Especially after that awesome story sequence, I wanted, you want your revenge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there's something to be said. It's a classic story of, going down to hell or whatever, and then having to get back up and finding a way back out. But I don't know. I didn't like the setting. The setting is kind of hard to see. I couldn't see. The enemies were kind of super generic, and the World War One thing was kind of interesting, although they do a poor job of explaining why the hell I didn't know why World War One. I didn't know.
Well, I can lay some knowledge on you for that one, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you can, but I guess the point is, at that time, I didn't know. I'm like, why is there World War II stuff here? Why am I in hell or whatever the hell this place is? Why? And granted, I'm notoriously poor at following narrative in a game, but though I still think part of the problem was that the game just didn't do a great job of explaining to the gamer what was happening and what was going on. It's just stuff was happening. Maybe they just figured that people who played the game knew the material already. Who knows, right? But I was just a little confused.
The funny thing we're probably going to be mentioning a lot in this game is the whole fact that this game tried to be really, really ambitious. It's to the point where I think it was trying to pull off really deep underpinning meanings where sometimes it's really difficult to kind of give that impression when you're not kind of nailing it, I guess you can say. Like, you're trying to do that really deep underpinnings of storytellings, but when you don't do it 100% right, it goes over a lot of people's heads. And I think even around the beginning, was kind of struggling with the idea of why.
They don't always stick the landing, do they?
Yeah, gameplay too. I mean, we're gonna get into that pretty soon, but it's kind of strange. That's why this is such
baby.
Come on,
Joseph.
That's why it's such an interesting game to talk about.
I'm foaming at the mouth to get to.
Yeah, because it's nice. There's an interesting game to talk about because it does so many interesting things that you just feel like you just wish a bit better. So, Otherworld, the reason why it resembles this hellish, it's like a construct world almost, inside the darkness, that when he dies, because supposedly the darkness can actually reconstruct its host's body, but it takes time. And when it's in that time, you end up basically going kind of inside of its world that it creates. Now, it resembles World War I supposedly because you find out that the first family member who was a host was Jacky Estacado, who was actually a soldier in World War I. And he came across this entity that, offered itself to him, and he kind of accepted it afraid when he was in the war. He wasn't really a fighting person. And, and ever since then, it's basically cursed his entire family to where passes down the line. So you kind of meet, I guess you could say, because he was the first, he's kind of also the first one who kind of is stuck mentally inside of the darkness. The only thing I didn't understand was how is it that other soldiers were in there?
Yeah.
Like other good men who looked really messed up. They looked like patchwork atoms, practically. All this, like, their skin looked like they had been patched up multiple times, like sewn back together or something. It was very, very gnarly looking, and the enemies were almost like zombie-ish looking,
like demonic.
Demonic
I
looking
kind of demonic,
Germans, I guess. And
it had some trippy imagery, like the demon that was kind of tied upside down to kind of like an upside down cross or something.
Yeah, because I think they said there were like interpretations of the Four Horsemen inside of it.
It did have some trippy imagery. Not enough of it to make that area interesting. Thought it was bland.
It could have done a lot more with what it had. So yeah, I'd say I when I went into there, I didn't expect it, but I thought it was just kind of gnarly, but it was, I started to wonder like what's the reason for it. So you kind of meet his descendant, or his ancestor. No, ancestor. Pardon me. You meet his ancestor, who's the first, and he's actually kind of still in the mind of, I guess you could say, the darkness, because he was the first, so he didn't really die. And that's the crazy thing, like, he's not really dead because he was the first, I guess. His consciousness, I guess, is still deep down in the darkness, and I'm unsure why, but, I mean, some of the soldiers had some scary, creepy things they would talk about when you'd listen to them in the game, and there was one sequence that that made me go, whoa, was I saw this soldier when I walked into the barracks, and he was, like, on the outskirts of the barracks. He was just sitting there talking to himself a little bit, saying a couple things, I'm coming home and everything, don't worry, I'll be there shortly. And then I just see him grab his rifle, and he just shoots himself. And I was like, whoa. And when that happened, I looked to the left, and there were these words that actually said suicide corner.
I think I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and I have to say that
was pretty trippy.
They're mimicking, the horrors of war. And the idea is whoever somehow got trapped in the consciousness of the darkness they're basically repeating this type of hellish world over and over and over again, and they can't really die. And that's not fully explained, though. That's one thing I wish was explained. Like, why is it that these other people are experiencing this hellish landscape over and over again, and that they can't really, like, escape? So that's one thing that I thought wasn't. I understand why it was the setting, and I understand why his ancestor is there. I just understand why there was everybody else. And it was very, very strange that supposedly, he tells you have to kind of find the castle that the darkness resides in deep in its subconscious, and try to gain control of it. So it's, as I said, it could have been done better. I say it was intriguing, but it definitely could have been handled a bit better. It was just very odd in the way the game was. I didn't expect it to go that route. That was another I guess you would say, strange story moment in the game that, once again, you feel like, man, there's so much potential here. And even in the concept art that they show, there was actually a lot more that they wanted to do. I just don't know if they had enough time. I mean, you were supposed to fight, like, angels and stuff, or the Angelus, as they were called, and all these other types of weird entities that, they were actually going to go a little bit more with the ethereal, cosmic like enemies and changes and all these things that were actually staples in the comics. They actually were going to do some of it, but I guess they didn't have time to. So
it doesn't surprise me that the game is not, I wouldn't say unfinished, but maybe there was more ambition there than what they were able to accomplish, just because you end up going to the same areas over and over and over and over, and like there's these just a couple of street areas, or in fact when you end up going down there to that darkness place 2 times, and it's the same exact place, really. It's not really, I don't think it's a whole new environment that they put you in. It's just kind of the layout's a little different, but they reuse a lot of areas, which makes me kind of feel like they're running out of time, or that their ambition was bigger than what they could probably accomplish.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because some games that struggle with that, you can definitely tell an unfinished feel. I thought it was surprising that the game didn't feel unfinished. It just felt like they wanted to do so much more. And it's kind of sad, actually. I think you and I mentioned that you said it wouldn't be nice if that game actually had like a whole redone, remastered version that actually added a lot of the stuff in, and that would have been really cool. Like, we could have seen like a bit more of what the developer probably wanted to do. Kind of moving this on a bit more is that when you supposedly go to take on the darkness at its lair, after you actually purposely cause yourself to die again, trying to take out Eddie Schroet, the corrupt police chief who's in the pockets of Paulie Franchetti. In a very interesting sequence, you basically get them to blow themselves up, but you die in the process. That Jacky uses this opportunity to, get to the darkness inside its, I'll just call it a construct castle. And he ends up, seeing it face to face. He ends up kind of in a way supposedly showing that he's giving away his powers to, and it was a weird game. It was a weird boss battle. If you actually fight the boss battle, you die. Like, you actually get hurt. And you actually are supposed to literally turn off all of your powers and just walk right up to him. Like, it's the weirdest boss battle. I actually realized.
How are you supposed to know that if you're not using a guide? Luckily, by that point of the game, I think I had been stuck somewhere, and I'm like, enough of this bullshit. So I pulled up a guide real quick, and the guy told me, for this boss fight, put away your weapons and just walk up to him and give him a kiss and a hug. I'm like, okay, what the hell? And of course, I did that, and sure enough, it triggered a cutscene, and I'm like, yeah, that's a great boss fight, right? Like, oh wow, like this darkness entity has been teasing you the whole game, and finally you get to fight him as a boss. But nah, you put away your weapons and walk up to him, and then it triggers a cutscene, and bam, end the boss fight.
Yeah, I was surprised. I don't remember if I myself looked up a guide or not. Only for the reason that
how did you know if?
Well, because Jenny was saying this weird thing. Like, she supposedly kind of every now and then, like, in his memories, or he would see her every now and then. That she mentioned.
Look up a guide?
No. But she said something like, don't fight him, Jacky. The more you fight, like, the more you'll lose. Something like that. And I don't remember if I actually caught that and went, wait a second. Because by this time, the game's already done a lot of, like, weird, what they call, what's
you know what? Hey, okay, this is a deep cut, but if like there's one person that hears this, I think they'll get it. There's this movie called Ernest Scares Stupid, and it's with Ernest. Remember the character Ernest? I don't know if you remember the character Ernest.
I don't think I actually know the character Ernest.
There's this famous character called Ernest, and he used to do a bunch of comedy movies, and he's great. And he does this movie called Ernest Scares Stupid, and it has to do with trolls. And at the end of the movie, he can't hurt the boss. He can't do anything. So then he puts down his weapons, and then he starts hugging the troll, and then gives him a big fat kiss. So the power of love defeats the troll. That's kind of this is what happened here. You put down your weapons, and the power of love defeats the darkness.
Technically, I would definitely say it's not the power of love when it comes to this thing. But I thought it was weird because the thing started like freaking out. When it started like absorbing him and like embracing him, but he basically got control of it. And I love how the darkness is kind of like, all right, like, you have me, like, for now. Like, kind of that thing where it's like, like, all right, fine, right? And
very Venom-like.
I thought it was kind of interesting. I mean, it obviously doesn't make for a very compelling boss. There are other, like, smaller bosses in the game, but it doesn't make for a very compelling boss battle. But I actually, to be fair, thought, hey, it was kind of a change of pace rather than, constantly trying to shoot at multiple bad guys in the game and being knocked dead quite a few times. In fact, I myself, when I got killed really quickly sometimes in certain games by, like, just two guys shooting at me at close range, I mean, you can die very fast. I remember thinking to myself, like, oh boy, Yvonne's gonna be so annoyed with this part.
What part? Which part?
Well, there were multiple parts. And you have to take on a ridiculous number of enemies that are kind of highs and lows. They're at the bottom. They're at ground level.
Well, the problem is... Yeah. See, the problem is if you don't have your darkness power, then, like, say you're just a regular person, then forget it. Like, you are a helpless child, basically. You will be taken out in, like, a second. So you need your darkness power because your darkness power is kind of like your shield. Mm-hmm. It lets you take way more hits. But the problem is that anytime you're in light, then your darkness power is depleting. Although there's nothing that tells you that. There's no meter, nothing. Like, towards the end of the game, I figure out that there's like this little sizzle sound that plays. Kind of like you're burning.
And you only found that out like late? You found that out late?
I swear to God, I did. Yeah, like it's like a like you're burning, and I'm like, what the hell's that? I didn't know what it was, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm in the light, and I guess it's burning my darkness or whatever. But either way, I knew that being in the light depleted your darkness, but it's kind of iffy because the shadows aren't always clear. What's a shadow, what's not, and whatever. I mean, it got better as it went on, but your power depletes way too quickly, so you might be in the middle of a gunfight, and then your powers just go away, and you're like, ah, shit, and then you just get blasted to all hell. So, it has a mechanic where you can shoot the lights and cover everything in darkness, etc. I mean, it kind of works, kind of doesn't. It isn't great, but if you don't have your darkness power, then you're out of luck, man. You forget it. Like, you're not going to do anything.
And that brings us into one of the ones that actually was probably the most, had the most enemies, was the solar eclipse assault on Frankie Franchetti's hideout, where eventually you finally find where probably not Frankie. I need to correct myself. Not Frankie, Paulie, right? The game version is Paulie Franchetti.
Like a black hole gun, kind of, right?
Are you talking about the wormhole ability you have?
Yeah,
the black hole. Yeah, I mean that was super helpful later in the game, especially at the mansion when you could just shoot it out and grab everybody.
That thing was a lifesaver. What it does is, like, you could open up this black hole and it sucks in multiple enemies at once, almost like that bomb that the guy from Guardians of the Galaxy throws. What's his name?
Oh yeah, Star-Lord.
Star-Lord, yeah, I remember he throws that bomb and it's like it sucks all the guys, and it kind of does that and is great for clearing a room. The only thing is that it kind of leaves you defenseless afterwards because it sucks up all your power and your darkness generally goes away after that.
Yeah, no, I could tell why they did the whole solar eclipse thing where you're taking on the hideout. It's like a mansion like near the sea. And the solar eclipse obviously is meant to be like, he's not having to contend with any light. Of course, later on, the bad guy finds out that light is the thing that hurts you, and he starts having all these spotlights set up on his mansion, and these lights near the stairwalks and everything. I'd say it's definitely the most intense sequence in the game. Funny enough, I had actually a lot of fun on the mansion assault, but then I also didn't. Like, dying was so common during that last part.
Would you believe me that I didn't die once during that part?
Really?
Yeah, which is funny because this helicopter part that almost made me quit the stupid game. Like, I died like 30 times there, but, and which you didn't have much trouble.
Oh no, I didn't. As soon as I found out what the how the copter was moving around, I knew exactly what I needed to do.
Yeah, but the assault on the mansion, it was annoying as hell, but I just went super slow. Like, I shot out all the lights, which kind of helped.
It does.
And then I made sure to bring out all your little helper monsters, because there's like these little portals on the ground, and you have an option to bring out 4 types of kind of demons. One has like a Gatling gun in the back, another one electrifies the enemies, etc. I just stayed in the back and kept just spawning. I made sure to find like a shadowy part, so I was always regaining shadow while constantly bringing out those little demons and letting them kill all the bad guys. And when I got to the lawn of the mansion, when there's like about 100 bad guys, they just keep coming out and keep coming out, I just stayed down in the stairs with in the shadow, and I kept spawning the little demons. And it took a long time, sure, but after like 30 minutes, they did all the dirty work for me, and then I just have to. And then from far away, I might shoot a couple, and as soon as I felt like I was low on power, I would go back to the shadows and hide like a little bitch, and then just kept spawning little demons. And you
probably used those guys probably more than I did. I didn't use them like nearly enough. I mean, I used them sometimes, but the dark
they were basically up until I got in the mansion. They did all the work for me. They literally did the whole work in the whole outer mansion part for me. They killed about 90% of all the enemies in the lawn. I did shoot out the lights from far away. But then,
because the lights can also kill your darklings.
So I made sure to shoot out all the spotlights from far away, and then I just kept spawning. Like I said, I stayed in the shadow, so I was constantly regaining shadow. And the enemies are pretty stupid, so they don't actually come down and try to get you. They just keep their distance and I kept spawning, especially the gunner. The gunner did a lot of the dirty work. So, yeah, I mean, again, slow, tedious level, kind of stupid, but I didn't really die, and I thought it was gonna be a nightmare, honestly.
After that whole mansion sequence, I think as soon as you get like really into the mansion, it's pretty like easy. It's mostly you just kind of taking out the bad guys. Yeah, it's like a story sequence, but you're kind of like you take out some guys, you go up some stairs, and it keeps switching to like these story sequences of Jacky like using his powers like really brutally. Which, to be fair, part of me would have loved if the powers were a bit more like that in the game.
For sure.
But it's a very cool sequences. They're done really well, and you can tell that the darkness is feeding off the fact that the more he takes a life, the stronger it's getting, to where even though he has control over it, he's not gonna have control over it much longer. So he ends up like doing all these things, and finally when you you find your way to Polly, they give you some time to kind of before you end up like shooting Polly supposedly. But you're
so
kind
you
of
want to know something funny
Polly.
about that?
What?
So I thought I was done with the game. I thought it was a cutscene playing out, so I put the controller down. Because I think Polly keeps saying stuff. He keeps talking to you, right? But I guess you don't, like, the game doesn't really tell you anything. You don't even have a gun out or anything. You know how there's been other games that do that whole thing where they put a gun to a character's head and they give you the option to shoot the character or not, or at least they force you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, Frankie was just standing there and Polly was kind of talking shit. And I put the controller down. I'm like,
Jacky
whatever.
was standing there,
The main character, yeah, Jacky. and then after like I don't know what was it, like a minute or whatever, then he takes out a gun and shoots me, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like he decided not to use his darkness and gave in, and instead sacrifice himself. And then I got the game over screen.
And you're like, oh,
that's when I realized, oh crap, I was supposed to shoot him. So then, luckily the checkpoint was pretty forgiving, so I went back up there, and then this time I'm like, oh, you're gonna get it, buddy, and I blasted him to hell.
Yeah, and I thought it was strange because then, of course, as soon as he takes out Polly, like the darkness is kind of like, you're mine, and he just takes him, and after he's like enveloped by the darkness, he's like on a bench, like on a park bench, and there's like kind of leaves around him, some light, and he's actually like his head is kind of resting on Jenny's legs, and she's kind of like brushing his head, and it's a very nice somber little moment where he's asking like if it's real or if he can stay or something, and she's kind of telling him that they have to say goodbye, and that she loves him and stuff. It was a very nice little sweet scene. And I didn't expect that scene either at the end. But I thought it was interesting, and then it kind of, goes to the point where he wakes up and everything fades to black, and they kind of leave it up to interpretation of what happens to Jacky later. Of course, then there was a sequel, so that kind of answers a couple questions. But very different for an ending. It's kind of a bit abrupt. I didn't feel actually unsatisfied either, though. I kind of thought, the story was about him getting revenge, and he finally gets his revenge, and there's just this feeling of like how he just doesn't care about much anymore. Like he got his revenge. He couldn't probably give like any care if the darkness took him over. And I thought that was the idea at the end of the game, which I thought was an interesting interpretation, because the only reason why he was trying to stay in control was because he hadn't gotten his revenge yet. So it's like as soon as he bested it and then took out Polly, there's no real reason why. And that moment with Jenny is kind of that deciding factor. You feel like he just doesn't want to do anything else. He doesn't want to go on. And she's kind of telling him that he has to. But it is left to interpretation if he's even able to when he wakes up. And that's the idea. Like, is he even able to with the darkness, having much more control over him? I thought for an ending, I thought it was pretty interesting. That once again, it tries to deal with some deeper, interesting subjects, and it sometimes hits them, and quite often it really struggles to give you a more concise thing. And I do feel that a good portion of it could have been that they wanted to do more, and maybe they were going to try to do more to explain things, that they did as best as they could, but that ambition that they had didn't really give them, they didn't really push that way to make it a little more understandable, even though they weren't able to do what they wanted, if you know what I mean. Like, make a couple of those cues a little more, I wouldn't say on the nose, but a bit more obvious. So I'm very divided on that game. Like, I enjoyed my time with it. By all accounts, I don't know if I'll go back and play it again, but I did enjoy my time because it's a very unique experience. I don't think you can find a game that is actually like the first Darkness. It's very unique. It tries a lot of new things. It is very ambitious. It does fall down, and it does have some aggravating moments. But for the story, I mean, I thought it was pretty interesting so far. But I do feel it could have been handled better. So now the meat and potatoes I know Yvonne's been gunning for a while now is to get into the assortment of gameplay related aspects that are I don't even know if it's a 50-50. Let's dive right into that then. So the darkness powers that you have in this game, Yvonne, you said you had a lot of trouble feeling like they weren't really well explained. Even then, would you say it's kind of, like, you didn't really feel like you're some overpowered character, did you?
No, not at all. And, okay, I'll fess up here. Part of the issue was that I had the auto HDR on my Series X. Mm-hmm. So what that did is it made the game kind of really bright, and I wasn't sure what was a shadowy area and what wasn't. So it really kind of screwed up the first part of the game for me because, it kept telling me, go in the shadows. I'm like, what freaking shadows? Well, I don't see no shadows, right? But it was really the auto HDR. So I do want to say that to be fair to the game. But, even then, I still thought that the mechanics were pretty confusing at first and or just not useful, right? I didn't have one of the first darkness power you get is like when you could kind of take control of a little snake and
the creeping darkness.
And you could use it to go into holes to open doors or pull levers or whatever generic stuff like that.
Well, you can also
even sneak up
on enemies.
You could sneak up on enemies or whatever, but I mean that was useless. I didn't do that really.
Well, I thought I used it actually quite often when I didn't want to get into a gunfight. I'd send him out and take out 3 people with that thing and bring it back.
I guess, but I didn't think it was all that much faster from just shooting them in the head really quickly.
That's true.
I guess, yeah. I mean, sure the option was there. I just didn't think it was all that effective. I mean, in fact, most of the time I tried using it, they saw it and they would shoot it out, or it would go into light and disappear. And also the control of that thing was kind of iffy at times, especially when you were trying to go up a wall. The camera could get all wonky. So early on, your powers, in fact, I just wish I could not have the powers early on and just use my guns, because the power was kind of useless at first. But they make you use it because, as we said before, if you don't have your power, then you don't have the shield. And if you don't have the shield, it's just normal you. And if it's just normal you, then you have the endurance of a 5-year-old. You get taken out so quickly, it's frustrating. So you need your power just for the
Yeah,
shield aspect of
and let's
it.
not forget that the shield technically is it's hard to even call it a shield. It's more like you turn on your darkness powers, you can take more bullets. You turn them off, you take less bullets. It's basically like the concept
it's almost
of the
like the
shield in there.
developer wanted a reason for you to constantly have the darkness. So they said, well, if you don't have it, then you're super weak. But the problem with that is, in order for you to have it, you always need to be in the shadows to constantly recharge your darkness. So it kind of slows the gameplay a little bit down, because you need to use it for the shield, but you need to be in the darkness and the shadows to recharge it. And some of those streets are super well lit, right? like the shadows aren't always super clear, I thought. Yeah, so the powers, you know what I wish the powers would have been more like? I wish the powers would have been more like BioShock. Where in BioShock, spoilers alert, although not big spoilers, but you know, you also have powers, and it's also a first person shooting game, but the powers in that game are just so much more fun to use, and the strategy involved in them are a lot more fun. That game uses the powers in the way that I wish the darkness would have used the power. Like, I wish they would have given you this assortment of powers, and then kind of be like a little sandboxy, where you're like, oh man, okay, I see enemies up ahead. I could probably have 5, 6, 8 different ways how to take out these enemies just based on my power. Or I could just walk in there and use my guns. But that's not fun. I'm going to use my powers to take them out. But the powers were just not that effective. And the ones that are effective, you get them kind of late in the game. And even then, they're not like whatever. They're almost more situational, right? Like that black hole, it's very situational. I used it for like group of enemies. Otherwise, I stuck to something else.
One power I think you and I probably didn't use enough of. I used it sometimes because it was useful, and I think it's because they didn't put an emphasis on how actually good of a power it was. Was the demon arm. Now, funny enough, the demon arm can
Is that
be
the green one or the red one?
It's the red one.
Right?
The red one. You can just use it to slash.
I tried using it for enemies, but it wasn't that great. I thought I was getting blasted more so than...
Well, no, that's what I mean, because what was weird, though, is I found out that in areas that had large objects or cars, you can actually stab a car with that and hold it down and toss a car at someone.
Yeah, but they don't tell you that, though. They don't explain to you...
And let's not forget about the bell. Remember the bell?
No, yes, okay, so there's an area in the game. I got stuck in this area. First of all, it's super dark.
Me too.
It was super dark, and there's this stupid freaking bell. And I knew, like, my gamer instincts were going off and said, you have to move this freaking bell out of the way. I just didn't know how, right? And the controls don't tell you jack shit. Nothing in the menu tells you jack shit. But then I think you're the one that texted me about it or something. I forgot how I found out, but I just got stuck in that area unnecessarily. To, you know, like, it's one of those things where you're like at a dead end and you're like, well, I guess the solution isn't here. So then you go back, but then you hit a dead end. So then you come back to this area and you can't figure it out, and you're going back and forth between areas because you're like, did I miss something? And the solution was just there all along. It's just the game did a poor job of teaching me what I needed to do, right? And I think this is a good segue to say how fucking slow this guy walks. Because he walks like a 90-year-old man. And you know why this is such a problem? Because when you're stuck and you have to basically explore to find the new area or the solution, and you've been stuck for half an hour, and this guy walks so slow. And Joseph, does this guy have a run button?
Nope.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't, Joseph. So then, so you're already, I've wasted half an hour of my life. I can't find the solution. And I'm walking back and forth between areas. And this guy walks so slow. It kills. Why is there no run button? Why does he need to walk so slow? I don't get it, man. This guy is a god. He has darkness arms sticking out of him. Why can't he, like, is he that cool that he just has to walk and he can't jog, like a light jog? That I think it was the most frustrating thing. And it discourages you from exploring, right? It, like, especially those notes that you said early on, that you could find different notes for collectibles, etc. Mm-hmm. Those would have been a lot more fun to find if this a-hole could actually walk faster, because that meant that I wouldn't mind going off the beaten path to search for things. But since this guy walks so slow and I've already wasted half an hour to 40 minutes of my life, I don't want to go in that corner to look for stuff. Because then it'll take me 10 minutes just to get back to the spot I was already.
Yeah,
so
I know.
The walking
the
drove me absolutely nuts. Ugh.
I remember that though. I was like, oh boy, this guy not even sprint is going to take forever. And yes, I thought it was such an odd decision. I don't know if it's because not a lot of games back then thought of using sprint. I don't remember a lot of games actually even had sprint during the early 2006 and 2007. It was still relatively new, so it's weird. I'm just amazed that not many people actually thought of having a sprint button back then.
No, I think you're right, but then it wasn't necessarily a problem. Because,
but they could have just made him walk faster.
Yeah, they could have made him walk faster, like GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Halo, etc. Right? Problem solved. His locomotive speed or movement, I mean, is faster, right? Even though he's walking, it's a fast walk. So it's not really a problem. It's not a big deal.
Well, yeah.
But in this game, he's just so slow. I cannot articulate enough how slow this guy moves. And it's a problem because it just discourages you from exploring. It really does, I think. Right? And God forbid you get stuck in the game because then, holy shit, you're wasting, the game does not respect your time. Because if they're going to try to be clever or at least ambiguous with their solutions, don't waste the gamer's time by making this guy crawl to where he needs to go. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably like the biggest sin of the game is that it doesn't really... It's weird, okay? So I applaud them for trying to do as many things as possible organically. Like, obviously, there's no health. There's no energy HUD. It's all visually aspected. Like, you go into darkness and you see the head starts breathing in this smoke and you realize, oh, that's you recharging like your dark powers or your health or whatever, right? And, the sizzling when you walk into the light or how they kind of, they make this little noise or stuff like that. And there's all this organic stuff. Or the traversal system, right? Using the subway and actually following street signs where there's actually, and then you do have a map, but it is very organic where there's not anything like...
Did you ever... That map was...
It wasn't that great. That map wasn't
garbage.
I didn't even bother to use it. I just started following the street signs and everything. So
yes, you're right. Technically, there is a map, Joseph.
Yeah,
that is a factual thing.
I know, but you're right. It wasn't that great. And so the thing is part of me, I applaud them for trying to be as organic as possible to try to keep it grounded, but that can be completely dismantled and become more of a sin when they try to have you do a lot of different things and you don't really feel like you're explaining a lot. Now, I'd say that I suppose maybe being a gamer or how I've played quite a few games, you have to think very outside the box sometimes. And sometimes I could kind of get what they were trying to do by just kind of looking around my environment. My problem was, though, is I could feel that this is not an obvious thing, and these are the kinds of mechanics that should be obvious. Like, there was quite a few things that should have been obvious that actually weren't, because this isn't like a puzzle game. And that was actually the problem.
So let's talk about the good and the bad as far as the traversal, right? Because like you said, the game is very organic, and that extends to the way you move around the world. And one thing that I initially did not like, but it kind of grew on me, was that, again, the map they provide. But see, this is what bothers me. They obviously want the player to traverse around the world using the street signs and the subway signs, etc., right? And I would argue that they do a good job with those signs. Maybe not initially, because initially when you're new to the game, you're really dependent like on a waypoint, like a kind of like modern games, right? Or at least a map to kind of tell you where you're going. But they don't do that, and I respect it. I would argue, why include the map if it's garbage? But okay, I respect that. And once I got used to using the streets and the subway signs, I thought they were fairly effective and at times actually quite brilliant. My problem is that sometimes when in the menu, when they tell you what your next objective is, they would tell you, go find your aunt on Olive blah blah blah, whatever. I'm like, oh, okay. But they kind of lied, because like the street was another street. Like the ant was nowhere near where they were telling you to go. Like, it was just so poorly worded that you could not use the street signs and the subway to find your ant based on how they gave you the instructions. It was so bad. And that's my problem, that if you're gonna make players depend on street signs, etc., you need to be accurate in your instructions, your next mission objective, right? If you're gonna tell them your ant, etc., is on the corner of blah 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 blah. I would argue most of the time, I guess they were, but there were quite a few instances where I was just completely lost. And then you couple that with his slow speed movement, and it just creates a nightmare scenario. And I guess last thing with this, because this is related, they're not always clear on which doors are doors that you could open or not.
Yeah, I struggle with that too.
Yeah, maybe they were, and I didn't catch the what the obvious sign was. No pun intended. But to me, they all looked the same. Doors that you could open or go inside looked exactly like doors that you couldn't do anything in. So then when there was an instance where I was looking for the ant and I couldn't find her because the instructions were so god awful, that I said, okay, well, it says you need to be in this section of the world. That's where I was. I couldn't find her. So I had to bump against every single stupid door in the world to see which one opened, right? And then you add that with how slow he moves. It was a frustrating experience.
It's very time consuming trying to find that. I eventually, after a while, I did kind of get the feeling, and this is the weird thing, right? So sometimes I started getting the idea like, oh, I know which door's open, right? But then I run into a door that looks vastly different from ones that can't be opened, but yet it also can't be opened. I'm like, oh, great, this is going to confuse me even more.
Yeah, exactly. And normally you could tell which ones are just textured doors that can't be opened, and which ones are kind of geometry.
They have like a handle, an actual handle.
Yeah, and they're obviously, oh yeah, of course. These other doors are just background doors. Obviously, they look kind of ugly, but they're just background doors. And these doors are obviously doors that you could go through, and there's stuff inside. But no, not the darkness. Every door, even the ones that can open and the ones that can't, they look exactly the same. You just can't tell, right? And maybe there is a way, and maybe someone's kind of screaming, through their phone or computer, whatever, saying like, "You idiot! The game tells you based on blah." I didn't know. I just didn't know, right? And if I didn't know, and if you're saying that you also struggled with this, and at some point I think the onus is on the developer to make it more clear, right? You just can't do something. It's like creating a Mario level in Mario Maker. You can't create a level that you assume is great, and then you put it out there and the data comes back that a bunch of people are dying here, and your reaction is like, well, it's their stupid fault. I got through it perfectly fine. You can't do that, right? You have to know that if this is a problem and more people than not are kind of struggling with this, then I wish they would have made adjustments to that. That's why I kind of say that maybe they were crunched, for time or budgetary reasons.
I think this is actually a good comparison we could do is actually Resident Evil 4 actually that we talked about. There's a good way to give people an idea based on the mechanics you give them to utilize every mechanic you have, but it gives you an idea that you can use them that way. And the difference of darkness is it doesn't necessarily do that. I mean, every time I got a new power, I would purposely look in the menu just to read about the whole power to see, like, maybe I would be able to understand it better and glean what I could do from it, which actually did help a bit. There were a couple things that I felt like, oh, this does that, and so forth. And hell, even the bell scene, I knew that when I was smacking the bell with my arm, I noticed for some reason it looked like it moved slightly, and then I ended up having to look up on a guide, and they said, oh, you shove your thing and you shove the tendril. I'm like, oh my god, and I'm like, this is why it was moving when I was slightly smacking it, and I didn't know why. And
another thing that wasn't clear is the upgrade system. Like, you could upgrade yourself by devouring hearts, but it was never quite clear to me what you were upgrading. And now I assume you were upgrading your health, maybe, or maybe actually there was how long you could hold your darkness.
Well, actually, I think there was only one way I remembered upgrading. You might be right that maybe upgrading the darkness, but I do know it was automated. And the only thing I knew is that the more you sounds weird to say this, the more hearts you ate. The more powers the quicker your powers were unlocked. The newer powers, like the the black hole,
I guess.
the tendril arm. I do say the only one power I think that's given to you is the darkness guns, which actually I started using quite a bit later on in certain sections just because
me
they're
too.
infinite.
Same here.
You just stay in the darkness and keep, shooting. As long as you're not in the
light.
In
fact, I used that exclusively in that the mansion level to pick off people from far away. But
I think the sonic boom gun that you have there actually.
Yeah. But sometimes it would run out of ammo and it switched to regular guns. So it was kind of weird. But you're right. I guess the upgrade system did unlock new powers, although it was never clear to me that that's what it did. I wasn't sure what was happening. I would just say you're upgraded, but every upgrade didn't always coincide with me having a new ability. At least I don't remember that. So,
well, I do know. Pardon me. I know it unlocked the new Darklings, though. I definitely know it unlocked the new Darklings. But
you unlocked those very early.
No, not all of them though, because there's about like 4 of them. Yeah, it's about like 4.
I remember by halfway I had all 4. I remember, and then another thing that was confusing is I wasn't sure what number of hearts was it every 50 hearts? Was it every 100 hearts? I wasn't sure, right? Like, I remember I was towards the end of the game and I'm like, I was like at 220 or 230. I'm like, well, you know what? I'm just going to devour maybe 20 more hearts before I get to the boss. Maybe it'll help me. And I got to 250 and nothing happened or something like that. Or I forgot the number. I think it was 250. But the point is, I was never clear what amount of hearts would do anything or what was given to me. And I figured out it wasn't health because I wasn't noticing that my health, the enemies were. In fact, I noticed I was dying sooner the stronger the enemies got, especially towards the end.
Yeah, especially you have the police guards that had like armor on and everything like that. Those guys were kind of annoying.
For them, I had the black hole, my friend.
Oh, I know, right?
I didn't even fuck around with these guys.
It's funny how you're saying that because that was the same thing with me. I didn't bother with the guns on these guys. Like black hole for you and black hole for you.
Yeah, and I mean it's funny because here you are spawned from hell basically with these terrifying things coming out of you. And yet these guys in tactical gear are like whipping your ass,
Yeah, I think it's a problem that quite a few shows and even games have where they tout you as being like this amazing badass, and then they make you feel underpowered. Weirdly enough, I don't think that was oddly enough, I think that wasn't the developer's intention. I think they thought that if you really know how to use the powers, you can actually do a lot of amazing things. And in a sense, there are some really cool things you can do in the game. I mean, there were a few times where, speaking of actually like feeling like a badass, I almost felt like that when you got into a really good streak of shooting there, and because the way the hands are really extended outwards, like an actual. One thing I appreciated was the hands are really extended outwards, like an actual person's hands holding a gun. They're very like you can see a lot of it.
Yeah.
And they actually change depending on the angle he's at, or if he's up against a wall, the guns will actually change to where he's, reaching his arms around the corner, which I thought was really cool. It was very dynamic how his arms moved. At least stood out to me that I thought felt probably really exhilarating was when you're on a rampage of using dual guns or dual machine guns and you're just going bam, 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 and you're like, laying waste to these people. You have your darkness powers there for the shield mostly, but you're just kind of gunning down rapidly like through all these people, and he's shifting out guns. He's like pulling out this gun, pulling out that gun, because there's no reload system in this game. You don't reload your weapons. He runs out of one gun. But it does have. He pulls out another one. It does have
a reload button though.
No, but a reload animation. That's what I meant.
Guess. I don't know. Towards the end, I was always reloading.
Well, technically, I don't even think that's reloading. That's actually him pulling out another variant. Like, I noticed because when I tried to do it...
It felt like reloading.
It kind of felt like it, but you can pick up... Technically, you're picking up ammo from enemies' weapons, but you never see him reload. Like, a game where you see the guy reload and you have more bullets. No, and here, as soon as he runs out of bullets, he kind of just drops the gun and pulls out the next pistol. Like, if you have... You actually can have, like... tons of pistols if you pick up from guys, but if he runs out of one ammunition of one pistol, he just switches to the next pistol until he runs out of pistols. Then it goes into whatever next weapon you have, like a shotgun or an automatic rifle.
It kind of reminded me of GoldenEye a little bit. Not quite the same, but in GoldenEye, to reload, your gun kind of goes off screen and then comes back up Again, not quite the same, but
yeah, but I could tell their reason, because even in the original concept art, it literally was a concept art of him having literally a ridiculous amount of pistols like in his belt. And it's the idea in certain movies where you'd see this guy shooting up the place and he just drop his guns and grab out 2 more.
Yeah, the problem with that is that I feel the cool shooting or the shooting animations and the way he moves is kind of betrayed by the auto aim. I thought the auto aim really was too strong, and it felt like a magnet. Right now, you could argue. Some people might argue that, hey, that's good, right? But I didn't think so, because it doesn't let you do kind of precision, shots, and it always seems to kind of want to go to the head for some reason.
Yeah, it's like a little dot too. The reticle.
Yeah, and then I'm not gonna lie. In some ways, that was good, because it could get some of those gunfights could get kind of frustrating. But in other ways, I'm like, no, man, like stop. I'm not feeling so much of a badass. I'm just feeling like I'm putting the cursor in a general direction, and the auto aim's just doing the work for me. I feel like they made the enemies bastards because the auto aim could kind of take them out. I wasn't liking that, and again, some of these enemies could be bastards. Would you agree?
Yeah, some of them were just really irritating, and you're right, because it would stick to them, and sometimes in the process of trying to stick to them, their body would move and it would miss because it's trying to only focus for you.
Yeah, and then what made things worse was that you were really intense gunfights. And you would take out 1, 2, 3 of them, right? And then you're like, all right, I'm done with you guys. Now let me move on to these assholes here that are kind of, whittling my health away. And guess what happens? All 3 of those enemies get right back up. So the game does this weird thing where I would say about 7 out of 10 times or whatever, they never truly die unless you get right up to them and devour their heart, or you finish them off on the floor. And a lot of times they look like they're dead, but then like a second afterwards or whatever, they kind of start holding their stomach and they kind of start squirming, and then a couple seconds later they'll get right back up with full health and start shooting you again.
I do know that if you hit someone in the head in that game, it's pretty much an instant death. Like they practically are, like they don't get up whatsoever. I do know that yes, there were a couple times if you thought you got someone, but here's the weird part. So if you shot someone a couple times, maybe in the middle area, there's the chance obviously you got them, but because that auto reticle would sometimes be a little weird, you would think you actually got them a lot, but really it's an animation. They fell to the ground, they get back up. Now there was an actual enemy that always got back up if you didn't eat their heart, and that was in the other world, where you actually, that the only thing,
that's annoying.
Yeah, you literally had to take them out, then eat their heart to keep them dead. But then the only weapons that keep them dead are actually the darkness guns. Like if you use the darkness guns. That was towards the end, right? No, I realized the darkness guns always, as soon as you get the darkness guns, they're actually the only weapon in Otherworld that can kill them immediately without having to eat any hearts.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. See, I didn't know that, but I also felt the humans got up far too often for my liking as well. And I noticed that during the helicopter sequence, where it was hard enough to kind of contend with this constantly hovering helicopter that's just taking you out. But then you also have a bunch of enemies on the ground and take down 1, 2, 3 of them, whatever. And I'm like, all right, time to move on. And then they would get back up and shoot me from the back, and then the helicopters getting me from the front. And it's such a nightmare scenario. And I'm like, why are you guys getting back up? I just emptied a clip in your belly, right? And then
how many bullets did you think actually went in the belly?
Dude, according to the auto aim, all of them, and then they act like they just got the wind knocked out of them, and they get back up like, all right, coach, put me back in, and then they start shooting you again. That was kind of frustrating.
And the strange thing is this was actually them trying to put emphasis on the powers, because when you use powers in the game, they're pretty much instant deaths. That's the interesting thing. Like, if you use the tendril and you hold it down, you can actually shove it in someone and you literally carry them and toss them, and it's an instant death basically. The problem is it does slow you down.
But I just emptied 2 clips on the motherfucker. I get emphasizing darkness powers, but not
no, but that's what I mean.
Minimizing 2 a semi-automatic. I mean, yeah, just because darkness powers are great doesn't mean that you could empty a clip on somebody and them get back up, and then the game taunt you and say, you should have used your darkness power. This guy got back up and now he's seemingly
Yeah, I said it's
normal again.
It's just it's an interesting topic because I said there were so many interesting things about it and so many ambitious ideas and cool things that I can see why back then at least it was considered like it was really highly rated back then. It's not actually considered that highly rated these days because, as I said, if you really go back, oof, you can feel the dated feeling.
If I would have played this game when it first came out, I think a lot of its flaws would have been a lot less noticeable, or maybe my tolerance for them would have been a lot higher, because it does do so many great things. It has great art style. When the mechanics do click, they do feel great when the stars align and everything that the developers intended for it to work. That what they probably had in mind with the gunplay and the powers working at the same time, and when that does click, it does feel great. It's just far often I felt it just didn't, So at the end of the day, it just felt like lost potential in my eyes. I guess if I could kind of really quickly follow up on the lost potential, another area that I thought the game could have gone into is, let me bring up Shadow Man again. So in Shadow Man, you get to go to kind of like the underworld, or however I don't remember what they call it in that game. But when you go to that world, then you're Shadow Man. You look different. You're using your powers. There's different enemies like demons and stuff like that. Similar to how in the darkness when you go into that darkness area. But then Shadow Man comes back to the real world, and then he's no longer Shadow Man. Now he's a regular person. So the mechanics feel different. The powers you use in that world are different from what you do when you're just a regular person, and it just feels different, right? So I wish the darkness would have done more with that, where when you're in the regular world, it feels different. Maybe you depend more on your guns and other mechanics. But then when you're in the darkness world, then you have a different set of powers maybe. And maybe that's not truer to the comic books. And granted, I will admit that I'm not the biggest expert in the source material. But I just felt they could have done more with the two different worlds.
It could have been because of the approach they took of trying to make it feel very organic when it's based on a very stylized comic book. If they decided to go a different route, to actually go more of a comic book way, what they probably could have accomplished in probably a less organic way, maybe hell even a less detailed way, but it probably would have made the gameplay hit more. And I think that's actually a point of difference between players who've played the first one and second one. I'm not going to go too much in the second one, but the second one, based on the stuff you've talked about or the complaints you've had, according to people, are non-existent in the second one because the game plays much higher of the focus. It's also a higher focus on making you have a lot of powers of the darkness. It's more comic book looking. There are quite a few people who don't like the second one because the first one was so gritty and realistic and tried to be so different, but then the second one kind of went more down the alley of, I guess you could say, BioShock in a way, where the mechanics work much, much better, but it does lose some of that more nuanced, distinct feeling.
That is a great example. Yeah, the difference between BioShock 1 and 2. But you know what? I could solve this. I have a scientific method to this. So I'm going to put this to rest right now. You've played part 2, right?
Not all of it, but enough to know the big differences.
But enough. Okay, it's okay. So, does it have a run button?
It does.
Okay, then there you go. Case closed. Part 2 it is. The better game.
Well, I would say
in stone now.
I wouldn't mind returning to this at some point after we've both played the second one, because I have to say, from when I played the second one, it was quite the different game. I was having I felt definitely powerful, which was the difference in the first one. So
that's probably because you could run.
Oh, you're gonna be like hammering that home at you. He can sprint. He can move faster. So
yeah, you'd be amazed how running actually does make you feel more powerful. Yeah.
So, but as I said, I'm glad we talked about the game. It was such a strange game. It was just because I got into.
Hey, Joseph, would you say that that's a running joke?
Oh no! Oh no! Oh, now that's gonna sit throughout the podcast. I know that for sure. The running joke. It's that a game needs to have sprint.
Okay.
Oh, good lord! But
that's it.
Well, quickly closing out, the biggest reason we actually ended up talking about this, funny enough, was to highlight the fact, not to highlight, but a quick little tidbit is that Since I've had the Xbox Series X, I've had the pleasure of being able to download for very, very cheap these, games, I guess you would say, that are out of time. That sounded weird, out of time, pardon me. That are technically like games that are more, in the niche group. They're more classics or cult classics that I never got to experience. And being able to play them for the first time, to actually even talk about them like this, I think is a true treat. Because otherwise, if I don't think we would have actually been talking about it or taken any time to do that. But I still think it was a very interesting game. There's a lot of people who hope for a third one just because of how it's gone over the years. It took 5 years before a sequel. So who knows? Maybe we'll come back to this. Maybe we'll talk about the second one, or maybe we'll talk about, hey, a third one's getting announced, and we'll see what we can do there. I just do think it's a series with a lot of potential. There's a lot of games out there that have a lot of potential in their franchises that are based off of comic books, like Darksiders and Battle Chasers. So I'm glad we actually got to talk about The Darkness, and I guess we'll see if there's going to be part 2 at some point.
Alright, our time has run out. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Modern Retrospect. We will be releasing new episodes every week on a variety of video game topics and game-specific episodes, along with some other surprises. We hope you stay tuned.
You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and pretty much everywhere else. If you enjoy our ramblings, please feel free to subscribe, rate us, or leave a message through email, social media, or voice so we can hear your feedback on today's topic. If you want more retro hits and modern bits, just hop on back. You have a good one.
Bye, everyone.
Wrong way, Jacky.